So tonight is, once again, on the calendar. Where's my calendar? There we go. October 30th, which is officially today is Pumpkin Patch Plunderer Apprehension Day. A nod to the ghostly night watchman keeping eye on the Halloween candy supply. Yeah. Also, in the cool parts of the world, it's known as Goosey Night. How many of you know that term, Goosey Night? Is it part of your upbringing? Not your upcoming upbringing? 'Twas the night before Halloween when all through the house every creature was stirring, even the mouse. The jack-o'-lanterns were carved with such care in hopes that a phantom soon would be there. The goblins were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of spider-webs danced in their heads. Mamma in her shrouds and I in my hood had just settled in for a grave ghostly good. When from the graveyard arose such a clatter, I sprang from my crypt to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a bat to see what ghoul had risen, but phantom in that. The full moon on the mist of the old graveyard ground gave a lustre of death to the headstones around, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a skeleton carriage and 8 ghostly reindeer. With a rattling old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be old Nick. More rapid than banshees his coursers they came, and he whistled and he moaned and he called them by name. Now phantom, now shadow, now spirit and vexen, on ghostly, on spooky, on doom, and on blixen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with a tombstone, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the wagon of haunts and old Nick's wraith too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and clanking of each bony hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in rags from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with cobwebs and soot. A bundle of hexes he had flung on his back, and he looked like a grave robber just opening his pack. His eyes, how they glowered, his grin, how it twisted. His cheeks were like hollows, his face had been blistered. His grim little mouth was drawn up like a gash, and the bone of his chin was as white as the ash. The stump of a candle he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a gaunt face and a sunken-in belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was bony and hollow, a right scary old elf, and I shuddered when I saw him in spite of myself. A flash of his eyes and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had plenty to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the pumpkins, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his wagon, to his team gave a hiss, and away they all flew like a poisonous kiss. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, Happy Halloween to all, and to all a good night. So, 'twas the night before Halloween. Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember that now. Now then, step into the flickering candlelight with me. The ghost story is a timeless tradition, a way of peering into the liminal spaces between this world and the next. The tales we share tonight explore the full spectrum of haunting, from the whimsical to the terrifying, from the personal to the all-consuming. We begin our journey in a small fishing village, where the supernatural isn't a threat, but a beloved neighbor. What follows then are stories that probe the darkest corners of human grief and regret. We invite you to listen with open ears and an open mind as we conjure 4 distinct echoes from beyond the veil. Our first one is called The Ghost Ship by Richard Middleton. Fairfield is a little village lying near the Portsmouth Road, about halfway between London and the sea. Now, strangers who find it by accident now and then call it a pretty, old-fashioned place. We who live in it and call it home don't find anything very pretty about it, but we should be sorry to live anywhere else. Our minds have taken the shape of the inn and the church and the green, I suppose. At all events, we never feel comfortable out of Fairfield. Of course, the Cockneys, with their vasty houses and noise-ridden streets, they can call us rustics if they wish. But for all that, Fairfield is a better place to live in than London, I think. Doctor says that when he goes to London, his mind is bruised with the weight of the houses, and he was a Cockney born himself. He had to live there when he was a little chap, but he knows better now. You gentlemen may laugh. Perhaps some of you come from London way. But it seems to me that a witness like that is worth a gallon of arguments. Dull? Well, you might find it dull, but I assure you that I've listened to all the London yarns you have spun tonight, and they're absolutely nothing to the things that happened at Fairfield. It's because of our way of thinking and minding our own business. If one of you Londoners were set down on a green on a Saturday night when the ghosts of the lads who died of the war keep tryst with the lasses who lie in the churchyard, well, hereabouts, he couldn't help being curious and interfering. And when the ghosts would go somewhere where it was quieter and leave. But we just let them come and go, and they don't make any fuss, and in consequence, our little Fairfield is the ghostiest place in all of England. Why, I've seen a headless man sitting on the edge of a well in broad daylight, and the children playing about his feet as if he were their father. Now take my word for it. Spirits know when they are well off as much as human beings. Still, I must admit that the thing I'm going to tell you about was strange even for our part of the world, where 3 packs of ghost hounds hunt regularly during the season, and a blacksmith great-grandfather is busy all night shoeing the dead gentleman's horses. Now that's a thing that wouldn't happen in your London, because of their interfering ways. But blacksmith, he lies up aloft and sleeps as quiet as a lamb. Once when he had a bad head, he shouted down to them not to make so much noise. In the morning he found an old guinea left on the anvil as an apology. He wears a watch chain now. I must get on with the story. If I start telling you about all the queer happenings at Fairfield, I'll never stop. Now, this all came of the great storm in the spring of '97. The year that we had 2 great storms. In fact, this was the first one, and I remember it very well because I found it in the morning that had lifted the thatch of my pigsty into the widow's garden, as clean as a boy's kite. When I looked over the hedge, Tom Lamport's widow, that was, widow was prodding her nasturtiums with a daisy grubber. After I'd watched her for a little while, I went down to the Fox and Grapes to tell the landlord what she said to me. Landlord, he laughed as being a married man and at ease with the sex. Come to that, he said. The tempest has blowed something into my field. A kind of ship, I think it would be, right there in my field. Now, I was surprised at that until he explained that it was only a ghost ship and would do no hurt to the turnips. We argued that it had been blown up from the sea at Portsmouth, and then we talked of something else. There were 2 slates down at the parsonage and a big tree in Lumley's meadow. It was a rare storm. I reckon the wind had blown our ghosts all over England. They were coming back for days afterwards with foundered horses and footsore as possible, and they were so glad to be back to our little Fairfield that some of them walked up the street crying like children. Squire said that his great-grandfather's great-grandfather hadn't looked so dead beat since the Battle of Naseby, and he's an educated man. Well, anyway, with one thing and another, I should think it was a week before we got straight again. And then one afternoon, I met the landlord on the green, and he had a worried face. I wish you'd come over and have a look at that ship in my field, he says to me. It seems to me that it's leaning real hard on the turnips. I can't bear thinking what the missus will say when she sees it. I walked down the lane with him, and sure enough, there was a ship in the middle of his field. But such a ship as no one had seen on the water for 300 years, let alone in the middle of a turnip field. It was all painted black and covered with carvings, and there was a great bay window in the stern for all the world like a squire's drawing room. There was a crowd of little black cannon on the deck and looking out of her portholes, and she was anchored at each end to the hard ground. Now, I have seen wonders of the world on picture postcards, but I have never seen anything equal to that. Well, she seems very solid for a ghost ship, I said, seeing the landlord was bothered. I should say it's a betwixt and between, he answered, puzzling it over. Not alive, not dead. Maybe it's an undead ship, you know. But it's going to spoil a matter of 50 turnips, and the missus will want it moved. So we went up to her, and we touched the side of the ship, and, well, it was as hard as a real ship. Now, there's folks in England would call that very curious, he says to me. Now, admittedly, I don't know much about ships, but I should think that that ghost ship weighed a solid 200 ton, and it seemed to me that she had come to stay, so that I felt sorry for the landlord. He was a married man. All the horses in Fairfield won't move her out of my turnips, he said, frowning at her. Just then we heard a noise on her deck. We looked up and we saw that a man had come out of a front cabin, was looking down at us very peaceably. He was dressed in a black uniform set out with a rusty gold lace, and he had a great cutlass by his side and a brass sheath. "And Captain Bartholomew Roberts," he said in a gentleman's voice, "put in for recruits. I seem to have brought her rather far up the harbour, Harbour?" cried the landlord. "Why, you're 50 miles from the sea." Captain Roberts didn't turn a hair. "Oh, so much as that, is it? Well, it's of no consequence." The landlord was a bit upset at this. "Now look here, I don't want to be unneighbourly, Captain, but I wish you hadn't brought your ship into my field. You see, my wife sets great store on these turnips." Well, the captain, he takes a pinch of snuff out of a fine gold box that he pulled out of his pocket and dusted his fingers with a silk handkerchief in a very genteel fashion. "Well, I'm only here for a few months. But if a testimony of my esteem would pacify your good lady, I should be content." And with these words, the captain, he loosed a great gold brooch from the neck of his coat, and he tossed it down to the landlord. Well, the landlord blushed as red as a strawberry. "Well, I'm not denying she's fond of jewellery, my wife, but this is too much for half a sack full of turnips." And indeed, it was a handsome brooch, very valuable, I think. The captain laughed. "Oh, tut, man, it's a forced sale, it is. You deserve a good price. Say no more about it." And nodding good day to us, the captain, he turns on his heel and he went back into the cabin on the ghost ship. The landlord, he walked back up the lane like a man with a weight off his mind. "Well, Tempest has blowed me a bit of luck," he says. "The missus will be much pleased with that brooch. It's better than blacksmith guinea any day." Now, 97 was a Jubilee year, you see. The year of the second Jubilee, you remember. And we had great doings at Fairfield. So we hadn't much time to bother about the ghost ship, though anyhow it isn't our way to meddle in things that don't concern us. The landlord, he saw his tenant once or twice, and when he was hoeing his turnips and passed the time of day, and landlord's wife wore her new brooch to church and every Sunday. But, well, we didn't mix much with ghosts at any time. Or except an idiot lad there was in the village, and he didn't know the difference between a man and a ghost, a poor innocent. Hello, Chantal. On Jubilee Day, however, somebody told Captain Roberts why the church bells were ringing, and he hoisted a flag and fired off his guns like a loyal Englishman. 'Tis true the guns he were shotted, and one of the round shot knocked a hole in Farmer Johnston's barn, but nobody thought much of that in such a season of rejoicing. Now, it wasn't till our celebrations were over that we noticed that anything was wrong in Fairfield. It was Shoemaker who told me first about it one morning at the Fox and Grapes. "You know my great-uncle," he says to me. Shoemaker says. "You mean Joshua, the quiet lad?" I answered, knowing him well. "Quiet," says the shoemaker indignantly. "Quiet, you call him, coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning and as drunk as a magistrate and waking up the whole house with his noise." "Why, that can't be your Joshua," I said, for I knew him for one of the most respectable young ghosts in the village. "Well, Joshua it is," said Shoemaker, "and one of these nights he'll find himself out in the street if he ain't careful." Now, this kind of talk shocked me, I can tell you, for I don't like to hear of a man abusing his own family. I could hardly believe that a steady youngster like Joshua had taken to drink, even though he was a ghost. But just then in came Butcher Aylin, and in such a temper he could hardly drink his beer. "Oh, you young puppy! Oh, the young puppy! Oh, he kept on saying. It was some time before Shoemaker and I found out that he was talking about his ancestor that fell at Senlac. "Drink," said Shoemaker hopefully, for we all like company in our misfortunes. The butcher nodded grimly. "Oh, the young noodle, he says, emptying his tankard. Well, after that I kept my ears open. It was the same story all over the village. There was hardly a young man among all the ghosts of Fairfield who didn't roll home in the small hours of the morning the worse for the liquor. I used to wake up in the night and hear them stumble past my house, singing outrageous songs. Now, but the worst of it was that we couldn't keep the scandal to ourselves, and the folk at Greenhill began to talk of sodden Fairfield and taught their children to sing a song about us. Sodden Fairfield has no use for bread and butter. Rum for breakfast, rum for dinner, rum for tea, rum for supper. Oh, we're easy going in our village. We didn't like that. Oh, the wee uns singing about us in the next town over. Oh, it wasn't even us. It was the ghosts that would get. Well, anyway, we soon found out where the young fellows went to get the drink, and the landlord was terribly cut up that his tenant should have turned out so badly. But his wife wouldn't hear of parting with the brooch, and so he couldn't give the captain notice to quit. But as time went on, well, things as they often do, went from bad to worse. At all hours of the day, you would see those young reprobates sleeping it off on the village green. Nearly every afternoon, a ghost wagon used to jolt down to the ship with a lading of rum, and though the older ghosts seemed inclined to give the captain's hospitality the go-by, the youngsters, the young whippersnapper ghosts, well, many of them 200 years older than me, but young for all that, they were neither to hold nor to bind. So one afternoon, when I was taking my nap, I heard a knock at the door. And there was Parson looking very serious, like a man with a job before him that he didn't altogether relish, you know, and going down to talk to the captain about all this drunkenness in the village. And I want you to come with me. He says to me, straight out. Now, I can't say that I fancied the visit myself. I tried to hint to the parson that as, after all, they were only a lot of ghosts. It didn't really very much matter whether they were drunk or sober. Dead or alive, I'm responsible for the good conduct, says the parson, and I'm going to do my duty and put a job to this discontinued order. And you are coming with me, John Simmons. So I went, a parson being a persuasive kind of man. Anyway, we went down to the ship, and as we approached her, I could see the captain tasting the air on deck. When he saw Parson, he took off his hat very politely, and I can tell you that I was relieved to find that he had a proper respect for the cloth. Parson acknowledged his salute and spoke out stoutly enough. Sir, I should be glad to have a word with you. Come on board, sir. Come on board, said the captain, and I could tell by his voice that he knew why we were there. Parson and I climbed up an uneasy kind of ladder, and the captain took us into the great cabin at the back of the ship where the bay window was. That was the most wonderful place you ever saw in your life. All full of gold and silver plate. Swords with bejeweled scabbards, carved oak chairs, and great chests that looked as though they were bursting with the guineas. Even Parson was surprised, and he did not shake his head very hard when the captain took down some silver cups and poured out us a drink of rum. Now, I tasted my rum, and I don't mind saying that it changed my view of things entirely. There was nothing betwixt and between about that rum, and I felt that it was ridiculous to blame the lads for drinking too much of stuff like that. But it seemed to fill my veins with honey and fire. Parson put the case squarely to the captain, but I didn't listen much to what he said. I was busy sipping my drink and looking through the window at the fishies swimming to and fro over the landlord's turnips. Just then it seemed the most natural thing in the world that they should be there, though afterwards, of course, I could see that proved there really was a ghost ship. But even then, I thought it was queer when I saw a drowned sailor float by in the thin air with his hair and beard all full of bubbles. It was the first time I had seen anything like that at Fairfield. All the time, I was regarding the wonders of the deep. Parson was telling Captain Roberts how there was no peace or rest in the village owing to the curse of drunkenness, and what a bad example the youngsters were setting to the older ghosts. The captain listened very attentively, waved a hello to Callie very, very politely, and then he put in a word now and then about the boys being boys and young men sowing their wild oats. But when the parson had finished his speech, he filled up our silver cups and said to the parson with a flourish, "Well, I should be sorry to be causing trouble anywhere I've been made welcome, but you'll be glad to hear that I put to sea tomorrow night, and now you must drink me a prosperous voyage." And so we all stood up and we drank the toast with an honour, and that noble rum was like hot oil in my veins. But after that, the captain showed us some of the curiosities he had brought back from the foreign parts, and we were greatly amazed, though afterwards I couldn't clearly remember what they were. And then I found myself walking across the turnips with Parson, and I telling him of the glories of the deep that I'd seen through the window of the ship. Parson, he turns on me severely and says, "If I were you, John Simmons, I should go straight home to bed." Now, Parson, he has a way of putting things that wouldn't occur to an ordinary man. And, well, I did as he told me. Hmm? Next day, it came on to blow, and it blew harder and harder, until about 8 o'clock at night I heard a noise. I looked out into the garden. I dare say you won't believe me. It seems a bit tall even to me. But the wind had lifted the thatch of my pigsty into the widow's garden a second time, and I thought I wouldn't wait to hear what widow had to say about it, so I went across the green to the Fox and Grapes. And the wind was so strong that I danced on my tiptoe like a girl at the fair. When I got to the inn, landlord had to help me shut the door. It seemed as though a dozen goats were pushing against it and coming out of the storm. "It's a powerful tempest, all right," he says, drawing the beer. "I hear there's a chimney down at Dickory End." "You know, it's a funny thing how these sailors know about the weather," I answered. "When Captain said he was going tonight, I was thinking it would take a capful of wind to carry the ship back to sea. But now here's more than a capful." "Oh, yes," said landlord. "It's tonight he goes, true enough. And mind you, though he treated me handsome over the rent, I'm not sure it's a loss to the village. I don't hold with the gentry who fetch their drink from London instead of helping local traders to get their living." "But you haven't got any rum like this," I said to draw him out. Well, landlord's neck grew red above the collar. I was afraid I'd gone too far, but after a while he got his breath with a grunt. John Simmons," he says to me, "if you've come down here this Wednesday night to talk a lot of fool's talk, you've wasted the journey." Well, of course. Then I had to smooth him down with praising his rum, and heaven forgive me for swearing it was better than the captain's. It was a far shot from that. But for the like of the rum that no living lips have tasted save mine and Parsons. But anyway, somehow or other, I brought landlord round, and presently we must have a glass of his best to prove its quality. "Ha! Beat that if you can," he cried. We both raised our glasses to our mouths, only to stop halfway and look at each other in amaze. For the wind had been howling outside like an outrageous dog, had all of a sudden turned as melodious as the carol boys of a Christmas Eve. "Surely that's not my Martha," whispered landlord, Martha being his great aunt that lived in the loft overhead. We went to the door, and the wind burst it open so that the handle was driven clean into the plaster of the wall. We didn't think about that at the time, for over our heads, sailing very comfortably through the windy stars, and was the ship that had passed the summer and landlord's turnip field. Her portholes, her bay window were blazing with lights, and there was a noise of singing and fiddling on her decks. "Ha! He's gone!" shouted the landlord above the storm. "And he's taken half the village with him." I could only nod and answer, not having lungs like bellows of leather. In the morning we were able to measure the strength of the storm, and over and above my pigsty there was damage enough wrought in the village to keep us busy. Now true it is that the children had to break down no branches for the firing that autumn, since the wind had strewn the woods with more than they could carry away. Many of our ghosts were scattered abroad, but this time very few of our ghosts came back to Fairfield, all the young men having sailed with Captain. And not only the ghosts, for a poor half-witted lad was missing too, and him no ghost. We reckoned that he had stowed himself away, or perhaps shipped as a cabin boy, not knowing any better. Well, what with the lamentations of the ghost girls and the grumbling of the families who had lost an ancestor or two, the village was upset for a while. And the funny thing was that it was the folks who had complained most of the carryings-ons of the youngsters and the rum from the captain. They were the ones who made the most noise now that they were all gone. Well, I hadn't any sympathy with shoemaker or butcher, who ran about saying how much they missed their lads, but it made me grieve to hear the poor bereaved girls calling their lovers by name on the village green at nightfall. It didn't seem fair to me. They should have lost their men a second time, after giving up life in order to join them as like as not. Still, even a spirit can be sorry. Not even a spirit can be sorry forever. And after a few months, we made up our mind that the folk who sailed on the ship were never coming back, and we didn't talk about it anymore. But then, one day, I dare say it would be a couple of years after, then the whole business was quite forgotten. Who should come traipsing along the road from Portsmouth but the daft lad who had gone away with the ship, without waiting till he was dead to become a ghost? Now, you never saw such a boy in all your life. He had a great rusty cutlass hanging to a string at his waist, and he was tattooed all over in fine colors, so that even his face looked like a girl's sampler. He had a handkerchief in his hand full of foreign shells and old-fashioned pieces of small money, very curious, and he walked up to the well outside his mother's house and drew himself a drink as if he had been nowhere in particular. The worst of it was that he had come back as soft-headed as he went, and try as we might, we couldn't get anything reasonable out of him. He talked a lot of gibberish about keel-hauling and walking the plank and crimson murders and things which a decent sailor should know nothing about. So it seemed to me that for all his manners, Captain Roberts had been more of a pirate than a gentleman. But to draw sense out of the boys, as hard as picking cherries off a crab tree. One silly tale he had kept on drifting back to him, and to hear him, you would thought it was the only thing that happened to him in his life. We was at anchor, he would say. We was off an island at anchor in a basket of flowers, and the sailors there had caught up a lot of parrots, and we were teaching them to swear. Up and down the decks, and the language they used was dreadful. Then we looked up, and we saw the masts of the Spanish ship outside the harbor. Outside the harbor they were. So we threw the parrots into the sea and sailed out to fight. And all the parrots were drowned in the sea, and the language they used was dreadful. And that's the sort of boy he was. Nothing but silly talk of parrots when we asked him about the fighting. And he never had a chance to teach it him better, for 2 days later, the boy, he run away again, and hasn't been seen since. Well, that's my story. I assure you that things like that are happening at Fairfield all the time. The ships never come back. But somehow, as people grow older, they seem to think that one of these windy nights she'll come sailing in over the hedges with all the lost ghosts on board. Well, if and when she comes, she'll be welcome. There's one ghost lass that is never growing tired of waiting for her lad to return. Every night you'll see her out on the green, straining her poor eyes with looking for the mast lights among the stars. A faithful lass you'd be calling her, and I'm thinking you'd be right. Oh, and Landlord's Field wasn't a penny worse for the visit. But they do say that since then the turnips that have been growing in that field have tasted of rum. Ha, ha. Rummy taste in turnips, which is better than turnipy taste in rum. But the question they leave unanswered is, drum roll, Caledonia's here, right? I'm surprised she hasn't answered already. Why is the rum gone? Okay, then. Anyway, sometimes ghosts bring a sense of wonder, as the townsfolk of Fairfield learn from their spectral visitors. But what if a haunting isn't a community event, but a deeply personal, chilling tune played for one person alone? From the sound of the sea, we turn now to the sound of a mysterious melody in Will Charles Oursler's Mandolin. No, I cannot do it. I break my contract, I know, but music is gone from me. I can no longer compose. But you can't do this to me, Rand. We're old friends. I've promised to have at least one piece by you in our next production. You can't let me down. I'm sorry, Wolfson. We are old friends, but I can't do the impossible, and it is impossible for me to compose anything now that sounds like music. I'm through. Oh, there, Rand. Perhaps you'll change your mind. After Wolfson was gone, Gordon Rand leaned back in his chair in silence, watched the butler clear the table. A quiet filled the room. Drunken shadows from the candle danced silently on the paneled walls. The corners were lost in leaden gloom. Squires? Yes, sir? I'm going to sleep tonight in the bedroom. In the bedroom, sir? You mean the room that was... Yes, Squires, the room I shared with my wife. I know it hasn't been used since last year, but to arrange the place won't take you long. I guess I'm just sentimental. Squires, but you see, it was a year ago tonight that my wife died. Nothing but sentiment, Squires. Anyway, I didn't remind you, sir. One doesn't always wish to be reminded of such things. If you pardon my saying so, is there anything else? No, yes, Squires. You remember my wife's mandolin? Yes, sir. It's in its case in the corner of the library. Now look, first of all, pack my suitcase for the trip tomorrow, right, Squires? Then bring the suitcase and mandolin to the bedroom. I'm taking both with me, and I must be all set to leave. Bring some wood to the bedroom, too. I may make a fire later. Very good, sir. Good night, sir. Alone, Mr. Rand rose from the table, walked to the mantel, switched on a light. The shadowed portrait above him seemed to come to life. Lustrous eyes of a beautiful woman looked gravely down at him. One might almost have thought the soft lips were about to speak. It won't be long now, dear. Not long. His words broke the stillness. I'm coming to join you, dear. I'm coming to join you. He could not bear it any longer. One whole year of living without her. One wretched year of hell. The world needed him. Needed a composer whose music was dead, whose notes had become jarring and discordant. He'd been a great composer once, perhaps. But that time was over. He would never write music again. The world would be better off without him, decomposing. Tomorrow he was going to Roaring Falls for a rest and a change of scene. He laughed mirthlessly. At least it would be a change. One could say no more. In the swirling torrent of the falls, he would find swift and sure death. Beyond that, he did not really care. Tomorrow, Alice. Tomorrow I'll be with you. The bedroom was a book, a diary of past hours, a book which Gordon Rand alone could read. Trivial, forgotten scenes reenacted themselves before him. How many times he had built a fire for the two of them. He stood before the struggling flame and poked at the smoldering logs. Now he had the blaze crackling arrogantly in the grate. Methodically, he put the smoking fire irons back on their stand and turned around, half expecting to find her there, her kind eyes upon him. How vain that hope. Gordon Rand sat long before the fire, dreaming, wishing, wondering. Dreaming dreams no mortal dared to dream before. Fate had taken from him the only thing in life that counted. There was no use going on. Music, too, was gone from his very soul. It had been there when he had written their piece, her piece. The melody ran through his mind now tormentingly. Yes, he better go to bed. He undressed slowly. By the time he finished his toilet, the red embers glowed only dully, sullenly in the grate. The room was nearly dark. He opened the window wide and went to bed. Ordinarily, he would have lain awake for some time. His mind was upset and excited. It had been a long day, and his body needed rest. Gordon Rand was asleep in a few minutes. Outside, the wind howled wildly through the trees. And then, music. Music. He fought his way back to consciousness and opened his eyes. The room was pitch black. He had only been dreaming, of course, dreaming that she played for him. The mandolin had sounded so real, though, their piece. But then a soft tinkle reached him, as if someone were really playing the instrument. What was that? His senses could not deceive him. Now he was awake. Someone must be there, some madman strumming tunelessly on the mandolin. He could hear the notes clearly now. This was real. Someone was in the room. Quickly he sprang from his bed and switched on the lights. The room was empty. He shut the window, put on his dressing robe, and went to examine the mandolin. It was safe in its case. Impossible. Yet no one could have put it away and escaped without a sound. He put out the light, opened the window, and returned to bed. Wide awake now, he listened carefully. And there it was, those notes. Music. Music from a mandolin shut in its case. A cold shiver ran through him. A shiver of delight, of wonder. It was real. It could mean only one thing, a sign from his wife. I understand now. His voice was low, barely audible. Squires woke him in the morning with breakfast. Good morning, sir. Mr. Wolfson is waiting to see you. You'd better hurry, sir. You'll miss the train. I'm not going to take you, Squires. Bring Mr. Wolfson up here. He won't mind if I'm still in bed. I want to talk to him. The butler ushered Mr. Wolfson in, stood at attention at the foot of the bed. Sit down, Wolfson. Well, how do you feel about it today? I've changed my mind, Wolfson. What? Good. Wonderful. Oh, grand. Oh, Gordon, that's great. My Lord, what did it? What changed your mind? You're an old friend, Wolfson, and I'll tell you. I know you won't let it get out. No, stay here, Squires. You've known me since I was a child. I want you to hear this, too. He paused. I was going to commit suicide today, Wolfson. I was going to kill myself. Fed up with everything, I wanted something of my wife's near me when I died, so I was taking her mandolin with me. But last night in this room, I had a sign. Someone played that mandolin. I didn't dream it. I heard it with my own ears. Yet no one was here. The instrument was in its case. I tell you, it was a voice from beyond. That's what changed my mind, Wolfson. Ha, sure, old man. Ha, sure. The producer smiled indulgently. I won't speak of it to anyone. Now, when are you going to start on my work? Today, at once, Wolfson. He leapt from the bed, threw on his robe, hurried downstairs. Mr. Wolfson trailed after him. Squire stayed behind. He opened the windows to air the place, began to make the bed. Suddenly he stopped. That tinkle, that sound, that tinkling music. It was what Mr. Rand must have heard. But this came from the fireplace. In a second, he realized it was the pokers, the tongs, swinging in the wind from the window. Oh, but I shan't mention that to Mr. Rand, said Squires. Downstairs, someone was at the piano. The butler heard swelling, rapturous music that filled the morning with its beauty. So, was it a ghost? Was it just wind? A personal haunting can be all-consuming experience. But some ghosts do more than just rattle chains or play instruments in the night. Some ghosts return to claim a life or bring a bad potato. And in doing so, they create a new one of their own. We move now from the unquiet sound of a mandolin to the quiet, heartbreaking story of a ghost child. Someone had asked why we called it 100 Ghastly Ghost Stories, because it's from a book called 100 Ghastly Ghost Stories that I've been picking stories out of since, last November. Me and my friend Lyra went through 4 books that had 100 stories each of them, and we picked about 70 stories because I was going to be doing 3 sessions a week with 4 or 5 stories each, plus all the countdown ones all month. So I needed a lot of stories, only it didn't quite work out that way. And so we're left with these stories, and this is where they came from. They came from the book called 100 Ghastly Ghost Stories. There, that's that. So, on to The Ghost Child by Bernard Capes. Well, I got excited and had fun being a very creative month, and I wrote a bunch of stories and didn't use the ones that we read. But, next time. And we had fun going through them anyway. Tryphena was the sole orphan representative. Where's that rewind button? A Ghost Child by Bernard Capes. Tryphena was the sole orphan representative of an obscure but gentle family which had lived for generations in the east of England. The spirit of the fens, of the long grey marshes whose shores are the neutral ground of 2 elements, slumbered in her eyes. Looking into them, one seemed to see little beds of tiny green mosses luminous under water, or stirred by the movement of microscopic life in their midst. Secrets, one felt, were shadowed in their depths, too frail and sweet for understanding. The pretty love fancy of babies seen in the eyes of maidens was in hers to be interpreted into the very cosmic dust of sea urchins sparkling like chrysoberyls. Tryphena's soul looked out through them as if they were the windows of a watery nursery. Tryphena was always a child among children, in her heart and knowledge most innocent, until Jason came and stood in her field of vision. Then, spirit of the neutral ground as she was, inclining to earth or water with the sway of the tides, Tryphena came wandering and dripping, as it were, to land and took up her abode for a final choice among the daughters of the earth. She knew her woman's estate. In fact, the irresistible attraction of all completed perfections to the light that burns to destroy them. Tryphena was not only an orphan, but an heiress. Her considerable estate was administered by her guardian, Jason's father, a widower who was possessed of this single adored child. The fruits of parental infatuation had come early to ripen on the seedling boy of Jason. The boy was self-willed and perverse, the more so as he was naturally of a hot-hearted disposition. Violence and remorse would sway Jason in alternate moods and made him be made in each in turn a self-indulgence. He took a delight in crossing his father's wishes, and no less in atoning for his gracelessness with moving demonstrations of affection. Foremost of the old man's most cherished projects was, very naturally, a union between these two young people, Tryphena and Jason. He planned, he maneuvered, he spoke with all his heart of love and eloquence. Indeed, it seemed at last as if his hopes were to be crowned. Jason, returning from a lengthy voyage, for his enterprising spirit had early decided for the sea, and he was a naval officer, Jason saw and was struck, amazed before the transformed vision of his old child playfellow. Yes, Tryphena was an opened flower, whom he had left a green bud, a thing so rare and flawless that it seemed a sacrilege for earthly passions to converse of her. Familiarity, however, and some sense of reciprocal attraction quickly dethroned that notion. Tryphena could blush, could thrill, could solicit in the sweet ways of innocent womanhood. She loved Jason dearly and wholly, it was plain. She had found the realization of her old formless dreams in this wondrous birth of a desire for one person whose new impassioned eves she had known herself be reflected hitherto only for the most patronized of small gossips. And for her part, fearless as nature, Tryphena made no secret of her love for Jason. She was absorbed in, captive to, Jason from that moment and forever. He responded. What man, however perverse, could have resisted on first appeal the attraction of such beauty, the flower of a radiant soul? The two, Tryphena and Jason, were betrothed. The old man's cup of happiness was brimmed. But then came clouds and a cold wind chilling the garden of Hesperus. Jason was always one of those who, possessing classic noses, will cut them off on an easy provocation despite their faces. Jason was so proudly independent to himself that he resented the least assumption of proprietorship in him on the part of other people, even of those who had the best claim to his love and submission. His pride was an obsession. It stultified the real good in him, which was considerable. Apart from it, Jason was a good, warm-tempered fellow, hasty but affectionate. But under its dominion of pride, he would have broken his own heart on an imaginary grievance. And he found one, it is supposed. He found a grievance in the privileges assumed by love, in its extracting claims upon him, perhaps in its little unreasoning jealousies. Jason distorted these into an implied conceit of authority over him on the part of an heiress who obviously was condescending to his meaner fortunes. The suggestion was quite base without warrant, but pride has no balance. Oh, good Lord, man. So a beautiful woman with a lot of money is in love with you and wants to marry you. Oh, no, heavens, I can't have that. What a goober. Oh, sorry, was my mic on? No doubt, moreover, the rather childish self-deprecations of the old man, his father, and his attitude towards a match he had so fondly desired, helped to aggravate this feeling. The upshot was that when within a few months of the date which was to make his union with Tryphena eternal, Jason slipped on a hockey mask and broke away from a restraint which his pride pictured to him as intolerable and went on a yachting expedition with a friend. Then at once, with characteristic violence, came the reaction. He wrote impetuously, frenziedly, from a distant port, claiming himself Tryphena's and Tryphena his forever and ever and ever. They were man and wife before God, he said. He had behaved like an insensate brute, he said. He was at that moment starting to speed to her side, to beg her forgiveness, and ditch the hockey mask, and beg the return of her love. He had no need to play the suitor afresh. Tryphena had never doubted or questioned their mutual bondage, and would have died a maid for his sake. Something of a sweet exultation only seemed to quicken and leap in her body, that her faith in her dear love was vindicated. But the joy came near to upset the reason of the old man, already tottering in his dotage, and what followed destroyed it utterly. Jason's yacht, flying home, was lost at sea, and Jason was drowned. The end. No, it's not the end, but it is a good time for applause anyway. Anyway, shortly after Jason was drowned, I saw Tryphena. She lived with her near mindless charge, Jason's old father, lonely in an old gray house upon the borders of a salt mare. and the little but unearthly cries of seabirds answered the questions of her widowed heart. She worked, sweet in charity, among the marsh folk. A beautiful unearthly presence was Tryphena, and she was especially to be found where infants and the troubles of childbearing women called for help and sympathy. She was a wife herself, she would say quaintly, and some day, perhaps, by the grace of the good spirits of the sea, would be a mother. None thought to cross her statement, put with so sweet a sanity. Indeed, I have often noticed that the neighborhood of great waters breeds in souls a mysticism which is remote from the very understanding of land dwellers. Now, how I saw Tryphena that day was thus. I was fishing on a day of chill calm in a dinghy off the flat coast. The stillness of the morning had tempted me some distance from the village where I was staying. Presently, a sense of bad sport and healthy famine prompted me, so to speak, for luncheon, and I looked about for a spot picturesque enough to add zest to sandwiches, whiskey, and tobacco. Close by, a little creek or estuary ran up into the mare, between which and the sea lay a cluster of low sand hills, and thither I pulled in. Now the spot when I reached it was calm, chill desolation, manifest, lifeless water, lifeless sand, with no traffic between them, with a dead interchange of salt. Low sedges at first, and behind them low woods were mirrored in the water at a distance, with an interval between me and them of sheeted glass, and right across this shining pool ran a dim, half-drowned causeway, the sea path, it appeared, to and from a lonely house which I could just distinguish squatting among the trees. It was this little house that was Tryphena's house. So now, paddling dispiritedly, I turned a cold dune, and I saw a mermaid before me. Well, at least it was my impression that I saw a mermaid. The creature sat coiled on the strand, combing her hair, that was certain, for I saw the gold-green tresses of it whisked by her action into rainbow threads. It appeared as certain that her upper half was flesh and her lower fish. It was only on nearer approach that this latter resolved itself into a pale green skirt, roped, owing to her posture, about her limbs, and the hem fanned out her feet into a tail fin. And her bosom, which had appeared naked to me, became a bodice, near to her flesh in color and texture. It was plain enough now, yet the illusion for the moment had quite startled me. As I came near, she paused in her strange business to gaze at me. It was Tryphena herself, as after inquiry informed me. I have never seen so lovely a creature. Her eyes, as they regarded me passing, were something to haunt a dream, so great in tragedy, not fathomless, but all in motion near the surfaces. It seemed with green and rooted sorrows. They were the eyes, I thought, of an Undine, late humanized, late wakened to the rapturous and troubled knowledge of the woman's burden. Her forehead was most fair, and the glistening thatch divided on it like a golden cloud, revealing the face of a wondering angel. I passed, and a sand heap stole my vision foot by foot. The vision was gone when I returned. I have reason to believe it was vouchsafed me in a few months of the coming of the ghost child. On the morning succeeding the night of the day on which Jason and Tryphena were to have been married, the girl came down from her bedroom with an extraordinary expression of still rapture on her face. After breakfast, she took the old man into her confidence. She was childish still, her manner quite youthfully thrilling, but now there was a newborn wonder in it that hovered on the pink of shame. "Father, I've been under the deep waters, and I found him. He came to me last night in my dreams, so sobbing, so impassioned, to assure me that he had never really ceased to love me, though he had near broken his own heart pretending it. Poor boy, poor ghost. What could I do but take him to my arms? And all night he lay there, blessed and forgiven, till morning he melted away with a sigh that woke me. It seemed to me that I came up dripping from the sea." "My boy, he's come back," chuckled the old man. "What have you done with him, Tryphena?" "I will hold him tighter next time." But the spirit of Jason in his Costco dreams, Jeans visited her dreams no more. That was in March. 9 months later, in the Christmas following, when the mare was locked in the stillness, and the wan reflection of snow mingled on the ceiling with the red dance of firelight, one morning the old man came hurrying and panting to Tryphena's door. "Tryphena, come down quickly, my boy. It's my Jason. He's come back. It was a lie they told us about his being lost at sea." Tryphena's heart leapt like a candle flame. What new delusion of the old man's was this? She hurried over her dressing and descended. A garrulous old voice mingled with a childish treble in the breakfast room. Hardly breathing, she turned the handle of the door and saw Jason before her. But it was Jason, the prattling babe of her first knowledge. Jason, the flaxen-headed, apple-cheeked cherub of the nursery. Jason, the confiding, the merry, the loving, before pride had come to warp his innocence. She fell on her knees to the child Jason, and with a burst of ecstasy she caught him to her heart. She asked no question of the old man as to when or whence this apparition had come or why he was here. For some reason she dared not. She accepted the boy, this Jason, as some waif, some accidental likeness had made glorious to their hungering hearts. As for the father, he was utterly satisfied and content. He had heard a knock at the door, he said, and he opened it and found this. The child was naked, and his pink, wet body glazed with ice, yet he seemed insensible to the killing cold. It was Jason. That was enough. There's no date nor time for imbecility. Its phantoms sprang from the clash of ancient memories. This was just as actually his child to him as, more so in fact, than the grown young figure which, for all his manhood, had dissolved into the mist of the waters. He was more familiar with, more confident of it after all. It had come back to be unquestionably dependent on him, and that was likeless the real Jason, flesh of his own flesh. "Who are you, darling?" said Tryphena to the boy. "I am Jason," answered the child. She wept and fondled him rapturously. "And who am I?" she asked. "If you are Jason, you must know what to call me." "I know, but I mustn't call you that unless you ask me." "I won't," she answered, with a burst of weeping. "It's Christmas Day, dearest, when the miracle of a little child was wrought. I will ask you nothing but to stay and bless our desolate home." He nodded, laughing. "I will stay until you ask me." They found some little old robes of the baby Jason, put away in the lavender, and dressed him in them. All day the boy laughed and prattled, yet it was strange that, talk as he might, he never once referred to matters familiar to the childhood of the lost sailor Jason. In the early afternoon he asked to be taken out seawards. That was his wish. Tryphena clothed him warmly, and, taking his little hand, led him away. They left the old man sleeping peacefully. He was never to wake again. As they crossed the narrow causeway, snow, thick and silent, began to fall. Tryphena was not afraid, for herself or the child. A rapture upheld her, a sense of some compelling happiness which she knew before long must take shape on her lips. They reached the seaward dunes, mere ghosts of foothold in that smoke of flakes. The lap of vast waters seemed all around them, hollow, mysterious. The sound flooded Tryphena's ears, drowning her senses. She cried out and stopped. "Before you go," she screamed to the child, "before you go, tell me what you were to call me." The child sprang a little distance and stood facing her. Already his lower limbs seemed to be dissolving into the mists. "I was to call you Mother," he cried, with a smile and a toss of his hand. Even as he spoke, his pretty features wavered and vanished. The snow broke into him, or he became part with it. Where he had been, a gleam of iridescent dust seemed to show one moment before it sank and was extinguished in the falling cloud. Then there was only the snow, heaping eternal chaos with nothingness. Tryphena made this confession on a Christmas Eve night to one who was a believer in dreams. The next morning, Tryphena was seen to cross that causeway, and thereafter was never seen again. But she left the sweetest memory behind her for human charity and the fey life gift of loveliness. So there's the ghost child. Deep, huh? Okay, so we got one more, and it's kind of a short one, so I think we'll make it through, eh? Tryphena, whose love was so fierce it defied death, and drew a ghost child from the sea, ultimately dissolved, leaving only her sweet memory. Hers was a love that was too much, too deep for this world, and it cost her everything. The wind dies down. The snow stops falling, leaving behind a silence vast and cold, a great, wide desolation where a loving spirit can simply vanish. But now, let us turn from the marsh, From the edge of the world, step into a place much smaller, much more stifling. We cross the threshold now, not of a lonely gray house on a flat coast, but into a dark, cramped city parlor. The windows are painted shut. The Afghan on the couch is heavy and still. There's no wild sea wind to stir the air, only the controlling voice of a mother and the sound of a father dusting in a house that is never quite clean. It is a stillness born not of peace, but of tension and unspoken regret. A stillness that is utterly suffocating. This is Dust by Edna Goit Brintnall. At first, Nellie thought it was only a dream. There had been no stinging summons from the rusty little alarm clock, no petulant call from her mother's room down the long flight of stairs. Yet Nellie could hear her mother moving about in the kitchen, her father's low answers. Miraculously enough, the two were not quarreling. She lay very still, tried to readjust herself. She was very tired, and it was pleasant, unbelievably pleasant, to just lie quietly and pretend she was asleep. It was high time she was getting father's breakfast, and a rather pathetic breakfast it would be. Just the two of them always. Mother usually had a headache, and Nellie took breakfast up to her in a tray. Not a tray with a rose clinging lovingly to the curl of a long crystal vase, but roses were expensive and not to be thought of even in midsummer. Mother usually ate her breakfast and turned over discontentedly and went back to sleep. Then Nellie hurried downstairs and dusted the living room. Mother was most particular about the living room. Beyond the living room, nothing much mattered to Mother. Nellie sensed that she was lying on a couch in the alcove off the living room. It was stuffy, and she could smell the dust on the portieres and the heavy odor of the Afghan couch cover. There were 6 strips of the couch cover, 2 tan, 2 rust red, and 2 faded blue, alternating and strung together loosely with a coarse tan twine. Sometimes Nellie and Wilbur sat there at night, and Wilbur held her hand and kissed her. She skipped over the thought hurriedly, but she had never before lain quite quietly on its soft, spongy softness. Mother spoke of the alcove as the cozy corner. It was nice. Even the sheet was over her face, just as she always put it, even in her own hard little bed up under the roof, to keep off the wind that sucked down through the flue in the chimney. Nellie liked her room, though it had nothing in it besides a very old marble-topped dresser shabbily painted white and an old mirror of her grandmother's that once had been resplendent with shining gold leaf. It was nothing much to look at now after she had painted the clusters of grapes along the sides. Blobs of paint made pimples on the sides of the grapes, unpleasant even to think about. The bed was thin and white and iron. It was cold in winter like the rest of the room, and hot in summer, like Houston. In the winter there was no heat. The tiny sheet iron stove in the corner was not good to look at, but no one bothered to take it down. It was painfully inadequate against the winter winds that threw themselves off the lake and beat frantically against the 8 tiny windows. Only half the woodwork was white. Nellie had intended it all to be white, but one can hardly judge the limits of a quart of paint. Even the white part was not all white, just a muddy gray where the deep brown of the old woodwork showed through, and now only 2 of the windows would open. The paint held them quite securely, making the room a furnace during the hot summer nights. Even at that, Nellie liked her room. There were 8 more of such rooms strung along the road toward the street corner. Nellie often wondered what they looked like, if they were as warm and cold as hers, if the wallpapers were as pretty as hers. Nellie loved the wallpaper. She had selected it herself. It was pale green with broad silver trestles and fairly bursting with pink roses. Roses that hung over her bed in joyous profusion. So low was the ceiling that Nellie could fancy herself lying in bed and really reaching out one slim arm and gathering handfuls to her thin young breasts. Looking at the flowers, she forgot the paint, and the lack of curtains at the windows didn't bother her anymore. She had wanted Swiss curtains with pink dots and frilled tie-backs, but as her mother convinced her curtains were not necessary up so high from the street, no one saw. As the door opened softly, Nellie lay very still. It was too nice for just a little longer. She wondered why her father hadn't gone to work today. Wrenching himself into his coat, pulling his hat down viciously over his bespectacled eyes, and slamming the door until the colored glass fairly rattled in its casing. From the kitchen, she could hear her mother's voice as a general directing his army. "Be careful now with that dust rag. Bill, you wipe off those windowsills and the top of the piano and the rungs of the chairs." So Nellie's father was dusting. How peculiar. She would have loved to peek out from under the sheet just to have seen him, but it was all too delicious. Mother getting breakfast, father dusting. Too delicious to just to lie all warm and comfortable and let someone else do something. Her mother came through the dining room and stood in the doorway. "We can put those roses in the green vase," she was saying to her father. Two whole dozen roses from the Goodmans around the corner. 2 dozen roses. It was beyond comprehension. Soon Nellie would stir herself and get up and wash the vase way down at the bottom so that no brown line would show. But not now. No, not now. Nellie thought about the house, stiff with dark red brick, and a jutting porch that went up stiffly as if making a long nose at the shabby cellar beneath. It cut work and balls and scrolls, all the painted red and dark red like the brick. The living room was nice. Mother always spoke of it that way. There was the onyx table with a bronze statue on it by the front window, the bronze lamp with the big red shade, and the glass-topped table by the Morris chair. There were green over-curtains, scant, very scant, it was true, and not quite covering the coarse lace edgings of the scrim curtains underneath. But Mother had made them in a hurry, and Mother's sense of measurement was not always accurate. Still, they looked nice. The piano was rosewood. Even Father was proud of the piano, though there had been weeks of wrangling and bitter biting argument over it. But Mother won. Mother always won. Just as she had about the house. Father had wanted a house in the country, a house that stood by itself and didn't have to be propped up by 7 others, all alike in a row like alphabet blocks. Father wanted a house that had sides to it, so that one could see, and not only just one stern high front windows that looked wide to the sun and not into a gray court that grew darker and darker as it neared the dining room windows. Yes, that's what Father had wanted. But Mother had not, and this is where they were. Perhaps that was why the dining room was rarely dusted. No one could see the dust in the dining room, even in midday. That is, no one but Father. Father could see, and sometimes he wrote the word dust in big scrawling hand across the shelf of a high golden oak sideboard. It always made Mother very angry, which he knew it would. Often Nellie saw it before Mother did, though she was not so tall, and that saved a row. Nellie hated rows. But Father and Mother seemed to enjoy them. Father always telling about his mother's housekeeping, Mother flinging back about never having a dime to call her own. Often Nellie could hear them below her, tense, bitter voices snarling at each other in the darkness. But when visitors came, and Mother and Father took on in some mysterious fashion the niceness of the living room, Mother was proud of the oriental rugs, and Father even praised the piano. Nellie didn't stir. She heard Mother's steps close beside her, very close beside her as she was speaking. "I think the roses look nicest here, don't you? We can put the rest of the flowers there, but the roses are lovely." "She liked the roses," said the father. "Well, I like roses too, but never a time to..." Mother stopped suddenly. Her father said nothing. "Anyway, her graduating dress was a bit too small, but I split it down the back. It looks real nice against the..." Her mother stopped. "She has real pretty hair." Her father seemed very close to her. He was praising her. Tears flooded in Nellie's eyes, but she kept her lips closed tight. She wanted to hear more, just a very little more. "I had real pretty hair too. Once you used to say so yourself, but with the scrimping and washing and ironing and standing over a hot stove and raising a... Her mother hesitated. "She wasn't exactly thankless," her father said, slowly as if supplying the word. "Maybe we should not have said she had to marry Wilbur. Wilbur's a nice fellow, but maybe Nellie didn't fancy him. Girls are sometimes that way. Maybe if we hadn't just forced her too far, Nellie would have got used to the idea, slow, like, and not run out into the street like a wild thing, get run over by that fire engine." Nellie felt her mother's breath freeze against her lips. "Don't you ever let me hear you say those words again. Not to anybody, any time," Mother said firmly. "After all, she was running out to see where the fire was. That's how it all happened. That's how it happened." "I guess you're right," said the father. "Well, I've got all the food ready and most of the flowers set up, and you better go up and get a fresh collar on you and your black gloves ready. The man ought to be here any minute, and you can help lift her. Her mother came close to her and lifted the sheet. Nellie kept her eyes tightly closed and waited. Yes, she looks real nice, her mother said, almost defiantly, just like she was sleeping. Yeah, said her father. Yeah, just like she was sleeping. Her mother laid the sheet back over Nellie's face. They tiptoed away. The heavy scent of roses came back to Nellie pleasantly. She wished the porters didn't smell like dust. So close the roses seemed, as if she could reach out one slender arm and gather them to her thin young bosom. She was very tired, laying there in the living room under the sheet. She wondered about the alarm clock. Perhaps there never had been any alarm clock. Perhaps she had only been dreaming. It was nice of the Goodmans to send roses to her mother. They were nice people. Even her mother and father were nice. A nice living room it was, a nice couch, comfortable, restful. Even Wilbur was nice. Nellie gave a thin, peaceful little sigh. The room was dusted. Somewhere father was putting on a clean collar and some black gloves. Somewhere mother, well, it was all too nice. And Nellie slept. And so we end tonight's journey through these classic tales of the supernatural. We've gone from the salty air of a phantom ship to the heartbreaking truth of a ghostly child, and ended with the inescapable, chilling residue of lasting dread. Well, the stories end here. The echoes of these hauntings remain. A whisper of what might linger just beyond our perception. I do hope you've enjoyed the visit to the other side. Thank you for listening. And happy Halloween! This is Halloween. Pumpkins scream in the dead of night.